Hey everyone! So today I'm making a stretchy knit t-shirt dress. I'm going to take you through some of the pattern drafting for the sleeves and just the sewing and construction. So what I have already is a knit sloper that kind of has the torso and the skirt built in together. And in order to make one for yourself, it's really easy. All that you do is you take your bodice and your skirt's kind of sloper and you just put them together, and then you eliminate the waist darts by just taking it in at the side, leave the bust dart as is. So this is kind of what it looks like. Now this one's really narrow and I'll get to that in a second. So you can kind of see that this was just the bust dart and that was where the waist is. So this is actually French dart because it kind of goes towards the waist. And then the bottom is really straightforward. You can see that's just literally, it's just the same thing as a normal skirt bodice sloper with the darts removed. And it's kind of, it's curvier than your standard sloper because stuff has been taken in at the side seam. So, and I suggest making up a mock-up and then fixing things up. So I've already done all of that. And because I have this really nice fabric that I got for Christmas, it's called a cloque velvet. And it's like this velvety knit, elasticy, ruching, textured kind of fabric. But I didn't realize that when I asked for it for Christmas, it was a really, really narrow width. And I had it in my mind that I wanted to make a t-shirt dress. So I decided to just make a tight t-shirt dress and reduce down my pattern width-wise. But I needed to make sure it would still go on. So to find out how much width I could reduce it down by, I took a section. So that's 10 centimeters on the ruler, right? So I took 10 centimeters here of the stretchy part, 10 centimeters, and then I stretched it out as far as it would go. And it goes to 15 centimeters. And then you take 10 divided by 15, and that's kind of your percent that you can reduce it down by. I didn't go the full stretched way, because if you do, then you won't be able to move in the dress and you won't be able to get it in and out, and it's just going to be a lot of tension on the fabric. So I ended up reducing it by 80%. So in order to do that, what I did was I took the original pattern, which it looked exactly like this. And then I measured, so I put some tracing paper over the original pattern, and then I would measure a perpendicular line from center front, which is here, to the seam, not the seam allowance, but the actual cut line, the actual pattern edge. And then I took 80% of that and drew a little plot. And then I did that all the way down the pattern, and eventually you get a series of dots that match up to your pattern. It sounds more time consuming than it was. It didn't actually take that long. I thought it would be really long. But in the process, the armhole changed a little bit. So instead of reducing it down on the sleeve, which I'm sure you could do, then you'd have to do it from the midline. So do 80% from this side of the midline and 80% from that side of the midline. I've decided to redraft a new sleeve. Okay, so I've started drafting. The first thing you do is you draw a giant T, like that. There isn't really anything specific about how you draw it. Those lines have to be perpendicular, and your paper has to be wide enough for the widest part of your sleeve, and the vertical line has to be long enough for the length of your sleeve. Okay, so now that you have your T, I've added a couple of measurements onto it. So the first one I did was from this point to this point, and that is 1/4 of your armhole plus your sleeve cap sort of easing. And so that's kind of around a couple of centimeters. So So when I measured my armhole, in order to do that, I used my ruler and I stood it up on its side and I measured this armhole, the front, and I measured the armhole back. Tried to be as accurate as possible. If you have a flexible ruler, you should probably use that and not a measuring tape. And then I divided by 4. So the measurement I got of my armhole was 40.7 and divided by 4, that was roughly 10.2 centimeters. So generally like 3 centimeters or 2.5 centimeters is recommended as ease, but as I've mentioned before, I don't like really a lot of puff up here, and I don't really think that it's necessary if you're going to make a knit top. So, and I can add it later if I think it's necessary. So so my measurement was 1/4 my armhole, as I mentioned, was 10.2, and so I just rounded it up to 12. And so this here, so this section, this is across, remember? This section is 12 centimeters. And then I made a mark at the bottom here, as you can see, and that is from the top mark to the bottom mark, that is your sleeve length. And in order to measure your sleeve length, I'll show you how I do it. It's not the most accurate. If you have someone to measure you, that's probably better. So I hold it over the top of my shoulder, and I kind of catch it like this. Try and untwist it. Catch it like this. So you just kind of want the bend that you would have if you're slightly walking. And then at my wrist bone, it was 59.8 centimeters. So I rounded that to 60 centimeters because I'm making a short sleeve, so it really doesn't matter how long I make it. I'm going to be chopping it down later. So now I'm going to move on to my next step. Okay, so to get these legs here, this leg, that, and that leg. So this is the front of your sleeve, and this is the back of your sleeve here. So this length here is the measurement of your front armhole, which I showed you how to measure before. And in order to get the point to intersect along this line, so there's 2 ways of doing this. So this is a right angle triangle. You can either use a squared plus b squared equals c squared and then solve for b here, or you can take the measurement of your front armhole, which for me was 18.5 centimeters, and you put it at this point here. So you put it at this point here, and then you just basically pivot until the 18.5 intersects with that horizontal line. And then you do the same thing on the back. So far, it looks like that. The next thing I did is I divided these top 2 lines here. So this is the front side. Okay. And so I divided the front into 4. So 1/4, 1/4, 1/4, 1/4. And from the top quarter here, out a perpendicular line, I extended it about 1.5 centimeters. And then on the back, it's 1/6, 1/6, 1/3, 1/6, 1/6. And I extended it from the first part, perpendicular line, 2 centimeters, and I extended it in 1 centimeter on the last intersection here, perpendicular line. To get the rest of the sleeve, I took the width of the sleeve that I wanted, which was, well, it was 6 inches. I measured that in inches. And then I put 1/2 on this side and 1/2 on that side and just drew the line down from here. Okay, so all that's left to do is, it's like that. And all that's left to do is to finish drawing the curves in, and then okay, so this is kind of what my sleeve is looking like now. It looks kind of messy, but I'm going to trace this out onto a different piece of paper to get it to look neater. So what I did was I used this side of the French curve on the top of the sleeve, and I just matched it out to that point that we drawn out earlier, that perpendicular line. Then I used this side of the curve to do this side, and then where they kind of intersected, I just kind of straightened that out a little bit. And then I did the same thing on this side, except on the back, we have this little notch that we had drawn before to match up with. One thing you will notice about the sleeve, the way you should kind of aim to draw it, is that the front of your armhole is, the front of your sleeve is more curvy than your back. All right, maybe you can see it that way. So this is your front, and this is my front. Now I have seam allowances added in here, so you're gonna have to ignore them. Just pretend I didn't have the seam allowance and this was the actual edge of my pattern. So then you hold it along your line, and then you pivot to match. And you keep going along, and then you keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. And you can see that's where it ended, just about here. I have seam allowances, and this is actually where I should be matching it, this seam allowance here. So I actually matched along there, and I ended up somewhere around here. So I'm quite happy with that. If I didn't like the way that went, what I would do is I would probably just shave a little bit off the top here to make it a bit narrower, or if I want it higher, I could cut along here, just across the top of the sleeve head, and lift it up, just spread it apart, tape some paper underneath, and see if I like that better. Okay, so the next thing to do is to trace out my pattern, because it's kind of messy looking. I'm going to trace it out onto a piece of tracing paper, and I would recommend tracing out the vertical and the horizontal guidelines, because that kind of helps when you're sewing it to match up the center of your sleeve with the, you can make a little notch at the center of your sleeve with your shoulder seam. Okay, so this is my sleeve with seam allowances added. I have added a 3/8 inch seam allowance and a 1/2 inch seam allowance, but I'm going to use a 3/8 inch seam allowance for this project. So I traced it out with a 3/8 inch seam allowance and made it into a short sleeve. I just squared across from this center line here, squared it out that way. And I decided not to make a mock-up of my sleeve because it looks, I compare it to some of the other sleeves I have, and I'm pretty confident it'll fit. And if it doesn't really work out, then I might just make it a sleeveless dress. Okay, so I've cut out my fabric, and it was super easy to cut out. So I just put the pattern on, put weights on, and the fabric didn't slide at all. So I just cut the front and the back beside each other and the sleeve on the bottom bit. So this is what the front part looks like. And so the first thing I'm gonna, so the front looks like this, like that. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna sew up the bust dart. And in order to do that, I'm bringing the legs, so it's like this. And then I bring the legs together, like so. You can't really see. Like that. And then I sew along here. Okay, so I've just used a straight stitch for that. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sew my shoulder seams. But since my fabric's going to get quite a lot of tension, I'm probably going to use a zigzag stitch or a stretch stitch. Okay, so I've done the shoulder seams. As you can see, this is the neck here. This fabric is really forgiving because if you pucker out your seams, you really can't see it all. But one tip, because it's kind of thicker, in order to get it through the machine, you really have to push it through with your left hand. Okay, I'm going to attach my sleeves on. So I've made a mark in the center where that corresponds with this line here. And I'm going to match that up with the shoulder seam. And then I've also marked which side is front, so I've written F, and which side is back. So when you're looking at the sleeve, the less acute angled side is the back. Okay, so I've pinned my sleeve on like that, and I'm going to sew it on, and it helps to sew it with the sleeve down so that you can kind of stretch the top part to fit. Okay, so I have sewn my sleeves on, and this is what they look like. I use a straight stitch first, and then I reinforce it with a zigzag stitch just beside in the seam allowance, and that's because my dress is really form fitted, so I think it's going to get a lot of tension. So if I find my sleeve, I will show you what it looks like so far. So there. Can't really see because everything is black. There we go. So the next thing I need to do is I need to sew up the side seams. So I'm just going to sew them along like that. I'm going to use a straight stitch first and then a zigzag stitch. Hi, okay, so I have done the side seams and I tried the dress on to see that it fit, and I'm really happy with it. So I'm just going to hem the sleeves, the neckline, and the bottom. So all I'm going to do is for the neckline, I'm just going to turn it over 3/8 of an inch and then top stitch it about 1/4 of an inch or however it is. And then for the sleeves, I'll probably turn it under 1/2 inch, and then on the bottom, I'll turn it under 1 inch. Okay, so I finished sewing my dress. I have a couple of notes on ironing and sleeves and hems. So the first thing about ironing is because this is a textured kind of velvet dress, it's really important that you don't want to crush the texture when you're ironing it. So use a lot of steam and don't use too high of a heat, and you kind of hold your iron just above the seam or just touch it, and so you give it lots of steam, and then you press down the seam with your hands or fingers, but don't burn yourself. So I did that, and then for choosing the hem length, I would say that because we've gone into negative ease, you stretch the fabric out horizontally so it will lose some of the vertical length. So put the dress on and make it longer than you kind of intend to actually have it, just to be safe. And I think my dress probably shrunk up maybe about 3 inches in total. And move around a bit because it might, before you decide on your final length, because it might end up that when you move, it kind of like stretches the dress and then it might shrink a little bit. So move around, sit down, stand up, try and walk up some stairs, and then pick your hem length. And finally, on the sleeve draft, I showed you, because it was a short sleeve draft, I didn't curve around the elbow. But if you were going to make a long sleeve, you'd have to add shaping around the elbow, or else you're going to get some excess fabric around this area because your arm is not completely straight. It's actually slightly angled, especially when you're walking. Like, you can get it straight when you extend, but naturally it has a slight bend. So you'll have to curve the sleeve around the elbow a little bit. But that's it, and I'll show you what the dress looks like from the front and the back.